Hello, I'm Bob Scott, president of Adelphi University. Welcome to another edition of Exploring Critical Issues. We hear and read admonitions to recycle: paper for paper, vehicle tires for turf, garbage for energy. In a dramatic example of recycling, the Navy's new amphibious assault ship, the USS New York, is being built with 24 tons of steel formerly used as the skeleton of the World Trade Center. 1 ton of solid waste, the garbage we put out in the bin each day, has the energy value of 1 barrel of oil, and when combusted yields to a reduction of about 1 ton of CO2 equivalent gashouse emissions. And only 13% of the nation's solid waste is used in this way. The potential for saving money and the environment is great. Then there is what we do with the more than 12 million excess cars each year, plus the worn-out buses, refrigerators, stoves, and strip malls, whose metals can be reused for more than warships. When scrap metal is used instead of virgin ore, there is a 74% savings in energy, all 86% reduction in air pollution, and a 76% reduction in water pollution, according to industry sources. Recycling, there ought to be a law. To help us explore these and other examples of recycling, the policy issues and the political obstacles to more extensive use of these technologies that could dramatically reduce our reliance on foreign oil, as well as aid the air we breathe and the water we drink. We have 3 experts with us today: John Cameron, Chairman, Long Island Regional Planning Board; John Waffenschmidt, Vice President, Covanta Energy Corporation; Marcia Bystryn, Executive Director of the New York League of Conservation Voters. Well, thank you for being on our panel. Appreciate it. Why don't we go around and just offer some comments about your professional relationship to this whole energy of recycling, resource recovery, and management. John, why don't we start with you?
Actually, most of my career, my professional career, I've been involved in the environmental industry and waste management industry. So really over 30 years I've been involved in waste management, from design of facilities, recycling facilities, operation, resource recovery facilities, etc. And so I've had an extensive involvement over my career professionally. My firm serves as a consultant to private industry and government alike on waste management issues, in particular on Long Island. Another capacity I serve is as the chairman of Long Island Regional Planning Board, and waste management and the issues that we face here on Long Island we've deemed it to be one of the critical issues that we're facing here on Long Island, in addition to housing, energy, transportation, affordability, social equity, etc. Waste management and the environment is a critical issue that we have to deal with, and we welcome the opportunity to participate today in discussing the issue.
Very good. Good. John, Covanta, what is it?
Well, Covanta Energy is an energy from waste company, and we take the garbage that everyone throws away and we just, turn it into electricity. We also collect recycled product on the back end, ferrous and non-ferrous products that all of the plants on Long Island collect it, and it adds to the amount of recycled material. I also was fortunate to have started recycling when I was a teenager. And when my thesis or my senior project was working on the New York State's beverage container law. And from there I did some work with New York City. And right now I'm working with, again, in industry, working on, resource conservation and making electricity from garbage.
And so that early project was from science to politics, was that it?
Well, it was interesting because I had the opportunity to met with labor unions and met with, can manufacturers, and sort of it was kind of interesting putting together, if you sort of look at what we're trying to do in society today, some of it's science, some of it's regulation, some of it's public policy, and we're trying to put that all together and figure out how can we best sort of manage our resources.
Very good. Marcia, how long have you been with the League, and what's the mission?
Well, the League I've been with now for over 7 years, and the League works to elect individuals who are strong on the environment and that hold them accountable. But my involvement in recycling began in the late 90s, early 90s rather, when I was the assistant commissioner at the Department of Sanitation in New York City, and I put together New York City's recycling program, which was a fabulous challenge and an experience which I think led me to better understand the complexity of the recycling issue. Most recently, I'm co-chairing a committee that's part of the MTA's sustainability task force, and that committee...
What does that mean with regard to the MTA?
The MTA has put together, under Lee Sander, the new head of the MTA, has put together a sustainability commission. And that commission is charged with coming up with a set of recommendations for the MTA, which will make it a more sustainable agency. I'm co-chairing the subcommittee on waste, which has the mandate of coming up with a set of recommendations to reduce recycle and to better manage the materials flows of the MTA. And both John and I are on a Suffolk County Commission on solid waste, Wither Solid Waste in Suffolk County, and I think recycling is certainly will be an integral part of the recommendations made there.
Help me understand, and the viewers understand, the dimensions of this issue. When we talk about recycling of waste, can you give us some examples in terms of tons or vehicles, miles that, I mean, thinking about trucks taking garbage off, the amount of paper that might be recycled? John, you have some perspective on these?
Well, we look at Long Island itself. Long Island produces each person, the total amount of solid waste is about 1.6 tons or thereabouts.
Say that again now?
1.6
each person?
Each person, and that includes that
Per
which is
what?
Per year.
Per person
1.6?
per year. And that includes, that number is what they do at their house, the stores and restaurants that they go to. That's sort of a composite number looking at Long Island and New York. These are New York State numbers that are applied to Long Island. About 40% of that or so goes towards recycling, and if you use the New York State numbers. And of that remaining amount, about 60% goes to waste energy plants on the island, and the rest of it, which is about 1.1 million tons, gets right now mostly trucked off the island to distant landfills, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Virginia, Maine recipients.
Wow. Mm-hmm. What are some of the figures that you work with in terms of the waste, different kinds of waste?
Well, I think one of the interesting challenges, certainly, and I know the New York City numbers better than Long Island numbers, has to do with what the goals, recycling goals are. And New York City was supposed to be hitting a 25% recycling rate by the end of this year. They'll be lucky if they hit a 15% number. And this gets to be one of the interesting policy challenges here, which is what should the goals be for recycling for any particular government entity? And what is the relationship between the cost to the municipality or government entity to do that recycling, as well as what are the environmental impacts, and how should those two be valued?
The number that John mentioned with regard to the 40% recycling number, that really includes the, as he indicated, the commercial waste stream, which is typically a higher level of recycling that is done by private industry than is done in the curbside programs. Now, Marcia's number, which I believe she alluded to, with New York City getting trying to approach 15%, is more on the curbside program.
It is. It's a residential. It's a residential.
It's a residential recycling rate, and the challenge we've faced here is over the years, the level of participation in the recycling programs, the residential recycling programs, has really diminished over the years. And I think that the general public has gotten somewhat complacent with regard to the issue of waste disposal, the problem of waste disposal, the economics of waste disposal, if you will. So as a result, the level of compliance has dropped, and the recycling rates really have dropped.
Really?
Where it really has still maintained a high level is on the commercial sector, because you have the private collectors, which typically they're going to, principally for reasons of economics, are going to maximize the recycling rate, whether it be on corrugated cardboard, all metals, anything that could potentially be recycled. The commercial carters are really going to do it.
Absolutely.
They're driven by the profit motive. So as a result, they really will do it more efficiently. And they actually can alter their collection methods so that they can maximize that recycling. On the residential side, it's much more difficult, where you pretty much most programs are dependent upon the compliance of the homeowner, the cooperation of the homeowner to separate the waste. And if the homeowner doesn't separate the waste in a typical quote-unquote curbside recycling program, then that waste isn't accessible or available for recycling. One project we're involved with is the Sanitary District Number 1 in the town of Hempstead, which actually processes the waste to pull out mixed recyclables. Now, where the quality of the recyclables pulled out may be a little more contaminated, it's well within the level of contamination and tolerance levels that can be handled by the end-use markets. So basically, all the material that goes through there can be accessed for recycling. So as a result, I think that type of process affords the industry an opportunity to increase recycling. And I think one area we're going to get here in discussion is where we go with this solid waste problem. And I think increasing our level of recycling is critical. But what's critical about it is that we do it cost effectively. For us to have trucks driving up down the street picking up, for example, take it to the extreme, plastics. If you look at what it's costing to collect plastics, it's hundreds and hundreds of dollars a ton just to collect a ton of plastics, because basically plastics are essentially, they're no weight, they're all air. So the challenge I think, for the island and for government and industry alike is to do this cost effectively.
Right. Do we do a good job in some areas in the residential? I mean, you mentioned plastic. We've got plastic soda bottles,
typically,
glass.
the best we've done is on newspaper. Newspaper, which is it's simpler to collect, it's simpler to remove for the homeowner, and it actually it's denser than, if you will, a lot of the other materials. Metals is also another area with tin cans, aluminum cans, where residential recycling programs have done a better job. Most recycling programs are not including plastics right now because of the bulk density and the difficulty in collecting these materials. But the materials which have been most successfully recycled, principally been the fiber materials, being your paper, your mixed paper, your various high grades, of course, in commercial areas, but also corrugated cardboard, which has principally been, again, out of a commercial recycling program.
Marcia, I would think that plastics would be a priority given the direct relationship to petroleum.
Well, it's an interesting question, you know, a priority given what framework here.
Yeah.
I mean, if one, in fact, is trying to reduce CO2 emissions, how do you make decisions about recycling? If, in fact, you're going to have to travel umpteen vehicle miles to move the recyclable to its ultimate point of recycling, are you, in fact, reducing CO2 emissions? This is part of the problem with recycling. There are multiple objectives built into recycling programs, and those multiple objectives frequently conflict with each other. And probably, I think I'd like to follow up with what John was saying. You want a cost-effective program, and you want to be clear about what your objectives are.
Marcia brings up a good point, which is about CO2 emissions. I'm going to make a pitch for the number one product that should be recycled, which is aluminum. This is a can. It weighs about 15 grams, which is about half an ounce. And if you take this and recycle it, this single can will save 1/2 pound of greenhouse gases measured as CO2. Taking that into a ton, if you have a ton of cans, a ton of aluminum goes to recycling, you have now reduced 13.7 tons of greenhouse gases. You want to recycle one product, to our viewers, this is the product to recycle. It is aluminum.
The numbers are staggering. I mean, that multiplier is amazing.
Well, the reason why is in order to make new aluminum, you have to put an awful lot of energy. There's a direct relationship, energy use into greenhouse gases. So you have to put a tremendous amount of energy to remove the aluminum from the bauxite ore and make it into a can. This is a great product for recycling. By the way, the 4 plants on the island all have ferrous removal, which is, you know, the iron type products, and they remove on average about 38,000 tons a year, which is worth about 65,000 tons of greenhouse gases. Just looking at the aluminum, the ferrous recycling there, only one plant that does about 1,000. There's only one plant. It's the Hempstead plant. Does 1,000.
John, hold that thought.
Sorry.
We're going to have to take a quick break, but we will return exploring this critical issue: solid waste recycling. We'll be right back. I think of Adelphi as a dream factory. You come to us, and we will encourage you. We will do all we can to nurture you, to dream bigger dreams than you ever thought possible.
We not only have great faculty, a beautiful place to go to school, but you have tremendous colleagues across the campus in all types of disciplines that will also enrich your life too if you let them.
You have the closeness of a small liberal arts college, but you have the world at your doorstep.
The faculty here have always taken great pride in knowing their students by name and being available to their students.
You're not a number here, and they know you, they know your interests, they help foster those interests, and the professors are so engaged in who you are and what you want to do. They've really helped guide me and give me those opportunities to grow with.
Welcome back to Exploring Critical Issues, Solid Waste Recycling. John, you just made a point that I'd like to underscore, because I think many of us, when we think about recycling, we're thinking about that aluminum can being recycled to make a new aluminum can, and we don't think about the avoidance of the mining of the ore and the energy it takes to mine new ore. You want to say something more about that?
Absolutely. I think if we're going to march to the future, and that future is going to have a different valuation on energy, on fossil fuels, a different valuation on the products that we use, we've got to think about what are the important steps for us to take there. And right now we're facing, a worldwide problem relative to global warming. We've identified the gases that do that. And so when we see an opportunity to make a decision where we can reduce a portion of that burden, if you actually run through the numbers, my argument is you have to take every single opportunity you can to reduce those emissions. Same thing with energy. If we're going to have a future where we're not going to be dependent upon fossil fuels, which on a worldwide basis we're 89 to 90% dependent upon, other than the warming of the planet, we have to begin to take steps to become more efficient so that as we find those other sources and implement them, they're going to be able to offset a sufficient amount of our day-to-day uses and needs.
Marcia, that relates to your comment about goals.
Well, absolutely. I mean, the question from my perspective on recycling is, you can't look at recycling in isolation from your broader solid waste management plan. So what's your objective? Your objective is to manage solid waste, your solid waste stream, in a way that minimizes CO2 emissions and preserves natural resources, and does so in a cost-effective way. And your evaluation of recycling should be seen through that particular lens. In theory, you could say that recycling, trying to take a plastic bottle and recycling it back into another plastic bottle does not meet any of those objectives. It's not cost effective. It probably increases CO2 emissions because of the amount of truck traffic you're going to have to generate to move it from point A to point B. So I think there's a problem thinking about recycling in isolation, not in this sort of broader context of what your solid waste goals are.
Yeah. So does anybody propose that we shouldn't use plastic? I mean, that would be a way to avoid that problem.
Well, plastic has served a very useful purpose in our society, and actually there's been arguments made that it can be more cost effective and can actually be better for the environment in some applications than the alternative, which could be paper. Which could be paper, cutting down more trees. Now, someone may make the argument that those trees are and those forests are being grown for that specific purpose. But you have to look at really, I think, the macro view, if you will, the long view from an economic standpoint, and also from a total environmental perspective. You can't look at it strictly that, if you look at the waste stream, essentially all the elements are almost virtually, most of them are almost all recyclable. Once they're mixed together, the challenge starts. How do we get them separated into discrete streams? And the challenge, as Marcia alluded to, is to do it cost effectively. There are environmental reasons for doing it. There are economic reasons for doing it. But I think the challenge for we in decision-making capacity here in society is to manage our waste in a cost-effective way. It's not to just maximize recycling for the sake of recycling.
Right. Absolutely.
But we manage our waste in a cost-effective way that minimizes the impact on the environment and is done so that it also doesn't adversely affect our taxpayers.
But following up on what Marcia said, she made an excellent point about looking at, and I think actually what we could use from a public policy standpoint is let's use a little bit more science in the decisions that we make, because if we look at plastic and compare that to a glass bottle, if I'm going to ship that bottle, I can ship a lot more product per the weight of the packaging if it's in plastic than I can if it's in glass. And one of the issues, an interesting issue on recycling, is that if you look at the 2-liter bottle, that actually decreased by about 53% over the last 20 years. And it's actually
the
53%.
Use, the consumption of
the amount of plastic that's in that bottle. So we've lightened the product. So if you had the same amount of units, you'd actually show less weight, because that's how we measure recycling. And that number is a couple of years old. There's new bottles right now that are 30% lighter in plastic, and you actually feel flimsy than the bottles of just a couple of years ago. Then go and say you were drinking in bottles 10 years ago, now you're drinking out of plastic, so you might have the same unit use, but it's going to be a lot lighter in those recycling programs.
Right.
And so there's been some reductions in waste production that we don't fully realize has occurred just by having these products being made lighter and having some product switching.
All right, that's a really interesting point. I was thinking, I mean, there's been a huge effort, I don't know how successful, but to educate the public. But then at the starting point is the design of products and product packaging and the materials used so as to reduce this. And what you're saying is, at least in terms of the plastic bottle industry, there's been work done to reduce the size and the weight.
That's correct.
Absolutely.
Do we see that in other products?
I think you do, and you see it where I think a lot of the automotive manufacturers are now looking to trying to design for a higher level of recyclability, and a lot of that really, well, some of it may be economics. I think a lot of it is the public relations that the benefit they can inure to by marketing a product which is at least perceived in the consumer's eyes as being much more environmentally friendly. You see that much more in the advertising today on a lot of the products which are being marketed. Part of it is economics, and part of it's the environment and doing the right things for the environment, but I think a lot of it is just smart marketing also.
And the two of them actually go together. I mean, for example, you're moving to a much larger commodity, railway cars.
Right.
Railway cars have become progressively lighter over time.
Right.
And one, in the end, has to recycle those as well.
That's true, right. So, and I suppose that applies then to stoves and refrigerators and other appliances?
Absolutely.
I think absolutely.
It occurs to me that there must be a major challenge in terms of the recycling of computers. At least I've read that. What are the special challenges there?
Well, I think if I can just jump in for a second, I mean, there's legislation being debated both in Albany and in New York City and in states across the country about requiring take-back of electronics by the manufacturers. The City Council in New York City is contemplating legislation on that. And I think that, my bet is within 5 years, something like that will be required. The manufacturers recognize it. So the producers of electronics know this is coming. What they're doing is trying to negotiate the best system. Is it a take-back system, or do they all contribute a certain percentage of money, which in turn will then be put into a pot and given to a municipality or someone else to manage that?
In terms of the design of products and product packaging and so on, are there some breakthroughs on the horizon?
I think you'd probably have to talk to some of the designers there, but I think, as John alluded to earlier, is that private industry, driven by not only government mandates, but economics, if it's going to cost more and more for them to dispose of certain materials, if they can reduce and the packaging itself, then they're able to ship more cost effectively. They have less waste product that has to be disposed of. So I think private industry, left to their own devices, is going to come up with a number of those innovations themselves.
And they may be pushed politically because there's a growing interest in take-back in all sorts of products beyond electronics. Right. And if you're going to be responsible for taking things back, you have a vested interest in designing in a way that has a minimal...
Batteries are another element of our waste stream, which is getting talked about, but there has been some discussion about mandating the take-back of batteries and deposits on batteries, because and I believe John, as operator of major waste-to-energy plants, would tell you that it doesn't do any good for his waste-energy plant, and it really just adds to his ash and adds to his emissions. From an environmental perspective, I personally believe that batteries should be getting pulled out of the waste stream, recycled, and not go into waste-to-energy plants. But that requires possibly some legislation, or at least it would require some legislation to effectively get them out of the waste stream.
We talk about sustainability. So I assume that somebody has developed a model that we have a population that grows at a certain percent. We have electrical consumption, energy consumption that grows at a certain percent. And we have a certain quantity of products that become waste. And I guess someone would say in an ideal system, all of that, quote, waste would be recycled for new uses so that we didn't have to create new waste. Is that what we mean by sustainability?
Sustainability is in the eye of the beholder,
Okay.
sir. But I think in the case of recycling, your objective with products in general should be that you minimize waste. Zero waste, in theory, should be your objective.
So
Practicable, no, but in
So
theory, it should be your
ideally
goal.
then there'd be no recycling because there'd be no waste?
Well, I think, you've moved to another topic, which is before recycling, and that is, your idea is to minimize the generation of waste in the first place.
Right.
You have to recycle something once you already have a
Waste. Right.
So I think if your first goal always should be the minimization of waste.
I think if we look at the question of sustainability, the reality is today, go across the planet and you're going to find hundreds of different definitions of what constitutes sustainability. But if we sort of get into the more, what are the basic elements of that? In the end of the day, you're going to want to, as Marcia said, have less waste, and you're going to want to be more efficient with regard to the use of energy resources. And so Suffolk County just passed a bill where they were looking at having the bags that people take going back to the store so that they don't become waste. You have the choice. Each of us have the choice every day. We go into the store, we're only getting a couple things. I don't want a bag. You go shop at Costco, you don't get a bag. So there's a way of having less waste to begin with. And when I was in college, I was very fortunate. I was able to go to a beer distributor, and they stocked a tremendous amount of reusable beverage containers with beer in it. So as I coined the term, reuse is the highest form of recycling. And I brought a cup here.
Reuse.
For those of you that this happens to be my daughter a long time ago, and she's 13 now, so she doesn't quite treat me exactly the same way as she did back then. But the point is, a lot of us will go, we're in an office, we go and take a paper cup over there, and the reality is we can reuse a vessel and drink coffee, and we can look at, when we get a bag, instead of just throwing away that bag, use it to, for something around the home. And there's more opportunities than that than we generally realize that we just apply ourselves to it. And so by definition, then we're making less waste because we're reusing those products or not creating the waste to begin with.
Help us understand a little bit about the relationship between waste and climate change.
You, please.
I mentioned before aluminum.
Right. Yep.
13.7 times more reductions in greenhouse gases measured as CO2 than if we made it from new. Paper is about 4.3. Ferrous metals is about 1.7. If you face the challenge of you have garbage that's produced on the island, the average distance it's shipped right now is 281 miles to a landfill in someone else's neighborhood. So let's do whatever we can on waste reduction. Let's do whatever we can on recycling. You have two choices then. It either goes to waste energy plant or it's going to go long distance into a landfill by any modality. And when we compare them side by side, the energy that's produced when we make electricity, and we even give a lot of benefits to the landfill, one of the models that we've used says if that ton goes to a waste energy plant, you reduce greenhouse gases by an additional ton than if it had gone to a landfill. And so if we want to solve the problems of global warming, we want to solve the problems of energy, I think we have to look at every decision. Right. You look at the decision about waste, look at the decision about product utilization, you look at the, how you heat and cool your home. Each of those decisions have an impact on it, and what we can't do is we can't cherry pick. We like this one because it sounds nice. We like this one. What you add up all of those, you're not going to have enough done to dent either greenhouse gas reductions or in offsetting the fossil fuel energy.
And there's got to be some potential shortage of places to use for garbage dumps for
Regardless of whether they're
whatever we do.
whatever you do with it, no one will want it there.
Yes,
so even if
exactly.
you have the space, but I wanted
Well,
to
let me just take a quick break, and we'll be right back to exploring critical issues, recycling solid waste. We'll be right back. I travel the country visiting alumni, and on every occasion, at least one person, usually several, talks to me about the scholarship that allowed them to attend Adelphi, and then they talk about their success in their careers.
If I'm going to be working for the world as a diplomat, I should be able to see the world, just to contribute to the world as much as I can. So my scholarship as a Gates Millennium Scholar, it's enabled me to do that. So I'm just trying to use that opportunity to spread my wings.
When a university has the capability to endow a professor, you're able to bring in faculty who excel, and so it doesn't just give credibility and a fantastic reward to an accomplished individual. It brings everyone else up to that level.
I think one of the things that really sets Adelphi apart is the richness and the breadth of the academic experience.
Welcome back to Exploring Critical Issues, Solid Waste Recycling. Before we continue, I'd like to introduce our expert panel again. John Cameron, Chairman, Long Island Regional Planning Board. John Waffenschmidt, Vice President, Covanta Energy Corporation. Marcia Bystryn, Executive Director, New York League of Conservation Voters. Let's just go back to this, the landfill, and obviously there's going to be a limit to how many, but there's also another problem with landfills, right? It's the methane gas.
Well, I was talking before about greenhouse gas emissions. The reason why landfills are greater emitters is because of the methane. Methane is about 20 times more potent than carbon dioxide. When we talk about greenhouse gases, we always bring it back to CO2, carbon dioxide, because that gives us a common framework to talk about. But some gases are 1,000 times greater than carbon dioxide. It turns out methane is 21 times greater. So if you remove 1 ton of methane, you're really doing the equivalent of removing 21 tons of carbon dioxide equivalent.
Wow. Tell us about Covanta and what you do and how this operates. And at the top of the show, I mentioned, I quoted from a paper you wrote, actually, on some of your work. But tell us how it works, and is this common around the country, this waste-to-energy process?
Yes, there's a total of 89 facilities in the country. It's pretty straightforward. There's collection of the same garbage that you throw away at your household. It's collected on a truck. It goes to a central area. That can either be a transfer station where it then goes somewhere else. That could be a landfill where it gets deposited, where most of the waste goes to in the United States, or it could go to a waste-to-energy plant. Once we receive it, anybody who comes to us, we check them in, we make sure there's no radioactive material. They have to have a contract or a relationship with us. It goes to our tipping floor. We examine the waste, visually.
What's a tipping floor?
It's a spot where the truck goes up and tips the garbage.
All right.
And then that area is under negative draft so that no odors go out. So you could visit any of these 4 plants on the island, and you're not going to smell them in the area because the air is being used in the combustion process. You burn it generally on a grate and make steam, convert that into electricity through a turbine, and it goes to the local grid. In fact, on Long Island, the 4 plants are producing over 100 megawatts of electricity on an ongoing basis. So if you look at that on a yearly basis, that's about the amount of energy that Long Island needs each successive year to add. We have to add another 100 megawatts of capacity to make up for the growth either in the population or in the consumption. But I'll go to my other pitch that I said earlier. Becoming more efficient is a very important objective. So we have to reduce, instead of going up the 100 megs every year, we got to get that to 75, 50, and maybe we can get it a year at 0, because that's part of the equation for going forward, an improvement in efficiency.
John, you have a prop with you. Looks like maybe some of the things that have fallen through the grate are here.
Well, actually, I brought this is a present not only for the guests here, but for the other workers here at the studio. One of our plants, we actually successfully remove coins. They're mixed in with our non-ferrous, and I brought some samples for you to take. And if they're American money, they are fully usable by you. And they say there's about 50 cents in every ton of garbage, except on Long Island. They say there's $2 a ton because we're a little bit more affluent.
I have to check this out.
Yes.
Right, and if you're going to ask me, can we recover paper money? The answer is no, because we burn the garbage, and so any paper would be burned.
How about that?
One of the old dimes.
Yeah, well, this is a penny.
Terrific.
John, reach in.
See what you get. It's like Chinese fortune cookies.
Yeah, right. But
ho!
what do you have?
He looks like he has a silver dollar.
Yeah, looks
A
like
silver dollar. The winner.
Let me just touch on
Went up exponentially here.
Let me just touch on the non-ferrous for a second, because in each ton of garbage that comes in, there's about 2.5% of that is ferrous, which is steel-based products, and about 0.15% is non-ferrous. The interesting thing about the non-ferrous is that 85 to 90% of that is aluminum. So if you go back to what I mentioned before about the greenhouse gas savings, that's now aluminum that wasn't going into a landfill, so we'd have to go and mine that material. That's aluminum that's now going back and being reused in an an industrial process for the making. Again, whether it comes back into a can or some other piece of aluminum, it's part of the the process of recycling.
But only 13%. Let's see, what is it? 13% of garbage is put through this process in the country?
Well,
Did I understand
correct.
that?
We have two plants which have gone through an expansion, they're both in Florida, but there's been a relatively long period of time where there hasn't been new capacity built. Europe is building a lot of capacity. China's building capacity basically because of greenhouse gases. And
They're building the capacity to turn waste into energy.
Well, I guess the question was, take your Coke can. What's the best way to deal with that Coke can? Is it to pull it out in the beginning and recycle it through a curbside program? Is it better to mix it in with the rest of the garbage, go through your facility and pull it out at the end? Or should the consumer be responsible for taking that can back to the grocery store as part of the bottle bill?
It's a fascinating concept. All I can tell you is when I first started recycling, since there was no place to go except a drop-off center, I used to crush the cans, save them in a big bag, and then bring them. So I kind of thought densification was a valuable process, certainly for me, on moving the material. And because they are light and airy, this is one of the issues in recycling. I mean, we're putting those trucks around to do it. I checked into how good our aluminum was, and they said, it is valued by the manufacturer. I think the price that we're getting is in the $800 to $1,000 range for a ton of non-ferrous. So it does get reused. I mean, obviously you wouldn't pay that much unless you could make use of it. But that's very interesting. I don't know if I know the answer of what's the best way to do it.
But it's a question that policymakers should examine seriously, both in terms of environmental impact and also in terms of cost effectiveness.
And to the point that John made earlier, I think I got this right, half of the waste is shipped off Long Island and is sent an average distance of 280 some miles?
John's number is 280 some odd miles, but I can tell you that it's tough to quantify because the commercial waste generators don't necessarily have, they don't necessarily report all the waste that they're handling. It's difficult to get your arms around that. But most estimates are that half the waste that's there for disposal is being hauled
I use
off the
40%, but I guess we're close enough.
Yeah. It's a very significant number, and frankly, I think from a planning perspective, we perceive that as a risk. It's a risk from an economic standpoint, from an environmental standpoint. We're somehow accepting the issue that we have probably hundreds of trucks every day going to and from Long Island, as John mentioned, hundreds of miles away to dispose of garbage in somebody else's landfill.
I mean, in a sense, we could say we're being selfish. We're only thinking of ourselves, and we'll let somebody else deal with our garbage.
There's no doubt, but I mean, whether it's a waste-to-energy plant, a recycling plant, it's somewhat typical of, I think, the attitudes we're facing here on Long Island. We as Long Islanders have become very parochial. It's tough to get any facility cited, whether it be a waste energy plant, a solid waste facility, a wastewater facility, or
Or
an
even
affordable housing project.
Yeah, right.
No, it's, any of those facilities, we become, basically nobody wants anything in their backyard. And then with the density we have on Long Island, everything is in somebody's backyard.
What if we were to say we're going to have a new Manhattan project, not for nuclear, but a Manhattan project, and the goal is to reduce the reliance on fossil fuels, and especially oil from countries that are not especially friendly to us, so that we're not sending them money that they can use to support others. And wouldn't that appeal to the public to say...
In theory.
This,
Right,
yeah,
in theory.
okay.
No, and that's a very valid point. In theory, you see probably almost unilateral endorsement of that.
Yeah.
In theory. The problem is where?
You want to raise gasoline taxes so that people use less gas and drive less? You'll reach far less unanimity in the public around that concept than on the broader
what
one.
if, government entities all have vehicles? What if, if you were president of the United States, wouldn't you just make an executive order that all government vehicles have to be hybrids and reduce the reliance?
Well, I think that's what's happening in a lot of places. I want to applaud a lot of the municipalities on Long Island that are already making that move. I think when it comes to sustainability and CO2 emissions, municipalities have a tremendous opportunity to combat this because a huge percentage of emissions come from municipalities. And they have not only government buildings where they can institute energy efficiency in terms of their fleets,
right.
where they can go in the direction of hybrids and other clean fuels. So there are tremendous opportunities. And I think what's important to the people watching this program is to begin to demand and at least support that their municipalities move in that direction.
John, you touched on, introduced a topic that I was hoping we would get to, and that's who's doing what? Where are some good examples? Where in the world are there some good examples of recycling, resource management, waste-to-energy projects?
One tremendous opportunity, and this is in waste energy that's in, or energy from waste in Europe, combined heat and power. You bring, and this you can do this with fossil fuels too, but you have your power, you produce your electricity from it, and then you take that heat the building or run the air conditioning system, and that reduces your carbon footprint because you're improving your efficiency to as low as you can. So combined heat and power, CHP as they call it, is an opportunity.
I'm not sure
to do
I understand that.
Let's say, for example, that we had a power plant in a small town.
Right.
And that power plant produced electricity for the town, and it also took its waste heat, and it heated the town in the winter, and it gave it cooling in the, in the summertime. And then I'll give, for those policymakers out there, real simple way. You want to begin to solve that big resource question, demand-based pricing. Make it a little bit more expensive in the daytime to use electricity, a little bit lower at night. You're changing the dynamic and you're getting people to think the right way because we're all built around this peak of consumption about 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Guess what? You can do your laundry. You can do that at night. If you have a pool, you can run your pool filters at night. There's a lot of things. You have a dehumidifier that only has to be on a portion of the day. Run it at night when there is less demand. As we go into what I hope to see plug-in hybrids, plug them in at night when, because we have a lot of generating capacity and we're all built for this peak, and it's beginning to get us to think about things in the right way to do it. On the recycling front, I think, I believe there's been, because if we look at, recycling is flattened out, guess what? Waste generation is flattened out too. So I think there are some steps. I mentioned a couple of them in the beverage container area. There has been some reductions in waste that have naturally occurred because, as John said, manufacturers has done a better job of making their products. As we begin to, walk into the future using e-communication as opposed to paper, all of these, make a difference. And as we think about the steps that we take, you have some papers there. Hopefully, that is printed on both sides. Or if not,
we won't check.
Or if not,
I always recycle. I turn pages over. I use both sides. I can assure you of that.
I bring the, paper products home, and I use them in my computer at home for printing things out. I actually will send them to businesses because again, it's a reuse of that product. I think there's a lot of opportunities that we can do individually and that government can do.
I think so. But I do think your point about the computer was interesting. Lately, people on campus have decided, for example, in distributing the minutes of the faculty meeting, to not print copies and distribute them, but to send an e-message to each person who then prints them. We're going to be right back as we continue talking about recycling, waste, and critical issues.
When I came to Adelphi, I made a promise. I promised that we would put our finances in order, that enrollment would grow with well-prepared students. We would bring accreditations up to the highest level, and that we would restore integrity to our university as a place active in the community. We made a promise. We fulfilled the promise. I hope that we have gained the trust of our alumni, and now we're ready to add to Adelphi in ways that have been needed for many years. We will prepare Adelphi to prepare students for the future.
Welcome back to Exploring Critical Issues. I wanted to know where else in the world there are good models for solid waste recycling. Can we learn from anybody?
Well, you can learn, it's very interesting because each situation has its own set of factors. For example, there are wonderful recycling programs in certain parts of California where you have low density and people do individual sorts of their material, which allows for a very pure product. It is not a model, however, that is easily translatable to New York City or a number of places on Long Island. I think the key thing here is not to get sentimental about recycling. You have to keep your eye on the ball. What are you looking for? You want to reduce CO2 emissions, you want to preserve natural resources. In doing so, it might make more sense to collect your recyclables commingled all together, rather than the individual sorts at the household, and then rely on a materials facility to sort the material out there.
Through some technology.
Right, exactly. Now, you're not going to get back sort of the pristine product that you would before, but you will be preserving natural resources, and you'll be reducing CO2 emissions. So there's the sentimentality about recycling is something people need to fight.
And I think what's key to recognize is when these programs started, we're talking about, essentially almost 20 years ago when the recycling programs had started on Long Island. And we're still, for the most part, doing it the same way of depending upon a homeowner taking it out of the garbage, putting it in a bucket, and sending a separate, manpower-intensive operation, a CO2-intensive operation, and we have not employed technology. Technology has leaped tremendously in the last 20 years. A lot of us we wouldn't be walking around with our Blackberries and Trios today if we were still depending upon technology 20 years ago. And I think there's opportunities out there, but I think you need government to be receptive to innovation of the private sector, and find more cost-effective ways of getting back to Marcia's point. Is what is our objective here? Is to reduce the amount of waste that requires disposal, and to do it in an environmentally and economically friendly environment.
So if you were czar, what would you do?
I personally would like to see a more integrated solution for Long Island. I would like to see.
What does that mean?
Well, I think what we want to do is we want to maximize recycling to the extent that it can be cost effective. We should be looking at other alternatives for recycling. I think looking at transfer stations as an opportunity for increasing recycling through mixed waste processing, et cetera, pulling out materials that don't belong in a resource recovery plant. Glass, for example, which is really not highly recyclable. It's not cost effective. There are very little markets for glass. However, when glass goes to the resource recovery plant, it becomes ash. So John doesn't need that in his plants. He'd rather have that out. So maybe it's not cost effective to recycle, but it should be removed from the waste stream. In addition, maybe there's certain organics that could be recycled through composting. Composting is a proven process. The difficulty is, again, is getting a facility sited somewhere, especially in a dense suburban environment. But once we've maximized recycling, we've pulled out materials, whether e-waste, et cetera, batteries that don't belong in a waste energy plant, then I think we want to focus on what those disposal facilities we have on Long Island and possibly expand them. Since it's so difficult getting new facilities sited, if we can't get them sited, let's expand the facilities that are here today. And we should be handling Long Island's waste, principally Long Island's waste. They run a private company here, and they may have to make a profit. They need to be a profitable enterprise. But we should be trying to direct Long Island's waste to the facilities we have on Long Island. And whatever we need to do in a public-private partnership, we should be managing that in an intelligent fashion. That being said, John still he's going to have ash to dispose of and some of these other non-processables. Let's get it onto the rail. Let's get it off the trucks to the extent that we can. We don't have a reliable rail system for freight right now, and so very little freight is being done on our rail. Let's get the trucks off the road. Transportation, the environment, CO2 generation, safety, et cetera, those are all reasons to get the trucks off the road. But I think we need to maximize our resources here, to employ technology to the extent that we can, to maximize also the recycling and removal of materials that can cause a problem if they wind up going to a resource recovery plant. That would be mine.
Bravo.
Yeah, right. John, czar?
I guess what I would say in the czar category, number one is we're going to have less waste because we're going to have less packaging that's going to be associated with the product. Since I can make that decision, I will. And along with
and I
that,
bet you would.
any product which is doesn't make sense in the waste stream because of its environmental effect, mercury, for example, it's no longer acceptable to use it in products. Therefore, it's not going to become part of the waste stream. And then we're going to, I would go, as Marcia was saying, go into a single stream, put it in and make it easy. Make it as easy as possible for the household so that they can, max it. I think the studies that have been done, it's a 20 or 25% increase in recycling if you go to single stream because it's one bucket, they put it there, they wheel it out to the curb, it's done with. And then
but is that the same as the garbage can?
You could make it look different, but in essence, it's the same size. It's the same. The idea
but
is that
it's a different container, not the same as the food waste.
Correct.
Right.
So it's 55 gallons, so that instead of my wife complains that I do only two things: I recycle, and I work on wood, which we put in a high-efficiency wood stove. She says those are the only two contributions I make. It's a lot. It takes a lot of time to recycle. You get it, you move it out, you keep it to the side, and all that the single container does, it allows a little bit easier for you to do it, and you get a little bit more efficiency. You get a higher participation rate. And then I would solve it locally. John went into it. The bottom line is, whatever our services are, we've got to keep them local. I mean, that's part of the way we're going to begin to use less energy. And
that's a way to think about sustainability, too.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
It's our system.
That's right. Taking care of our problems and our challenges here at home, not exporting them 280 miles away. Let's deal with our problems home.
I'm sorry, I got another couple of points here. I'm still going to do my demand side pricing for power, and guess what? The CAFE standards are going up.
And what do you
double.
mean by CAFE?
That's the car efficiency standards. We have basically been flat for 20 years. Transportation, you cannot look to the future without solving transportation.
Right.
And the way you got to start, again, when I said it's efficiency, I say take whatever the efficiency standard is today, vehicle life turnover is about 15 years. We should be double at the end of that 15 years. Congress can do it today.
What do you mean by that?
Congress?
What do you mean by that?
If you let's say,
useful life,
I think
30 years instead of 15?
No, I think the useful life, of a car is in the 7 to 11 year range. And usually when they talk about fleet turnover, they talk about something, in the 10 to 15 year range. What I'm talking about is that if you took the average of all of the vehicles that a manufacturer produces, I think the overall average is someplace in the low 20s. Let's double that. Let's say in 15 years from now we're going to be at, let's say, 45 miles per gallon as an average.
I see. Okay.
And that is the way you're going to address some of these problems. And there's a lot of people out there, and some of your viewers will have this opinion that is a burden to the American people. The fact of the matter is we not only have to think about what our issues are today, we've got to think about our children and our grandchildren, et cetera. Yeah. And these kind of issues will come to the forefront, whether they come now and whether we're successful here as four czars around the table, or we deal with this later on. These issues will be addressed because we won't going to have the choice as we begin to use more and more throughout the world.
Your turn.
Well, I think my colleagues here have hit the big things, but I want to sort of go back to creating the necessary both political pressure and business pressure to reduce the generation of waste in the first place. Certainly governments are well positioned to do that. Moreover, corporations are. Walmart at one moment in time, which has tremendous power over its suppliers, can basically get them to do whatever they want because of the amount that they can leverage, making a demand that the CO2 emissions that they generate are at a low level. They can do that. The MTA, when we're talking about what the MTA can do on a sustainability basis, they can leverage suppliers of fuel, vehicles in all sorts of ways because of the volume that they purchase. They can demand all kinds of things and generate innovation doing so. And I think that those of you who are watching television now ought to be paying attention to what's going on in Albany, what's going on Long Island, in your town, in your county, in terms of initiatives that can work to reduce packaging and minimize energy use.
And are there some initiatives out there that we should be supporting, that we should be learning more about?
Well, I mean, I think that in terms of government now, state government has rules which require that government minimizes the use of energy in government buildings, uses hybrid fuels. I think one can put pressure on them to extend that. There's the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative that New York State's part of with other states in the region. I think we can bring pressure on governments to expand that beyond power plants to all stationary sources. Keep an eye on what you can do locally, not simply worrying about what you may or may not be able to get Congress to do.
I've learned a lot. I hope you have as well. This is another of Exploring Critical Issues. Today, solid waste recycling. I have some new steps to take. Thanks for watching, and thank you very much.
Thank you.